The landscape behind the windshield flashed by at an alarming speed. I overtook cars as if they were standing still. One of the few pleasures I had left was driving my silver 2008 Mustang GT just over the legal speed limit of 70 miles per hour. A little meant the speed was about 110. I heard a beep that was definitely not from the car. I knew every sound my Mustang's engine, tires, and suspension made. I also knew every crease in the Harlot red leather upholstery. I looked at the cup holder on the right and saw my iPhone screen light up. I also saw the smiling face of my recently ex-wife. Recently meant that our day in court was just 3 days ago. And ex meant that if this bitch was on fire, I wouldn't piss on her. But in this naive attitude that only children and incredibly beautiful women have, she called me as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I breathed a sigh of relief when the phone stopped ringing after a few moments. I started swearing to myself when it rang again just a few seconds later. I slowed down to a more manageable 80 miles per hour and answered the phone in the most cheerful voice I could muster. "What do you want, dirty bitch? You've already taken half of my money and my house. Okay, maybe I wasn't too polite, but I really tried. Well, I'm in the emergency room. Craig beat me up, and I need someone to take me and give me a place to stay until he calms down," she said. Craig, of course, was the guy she cheated on me with and who caused our divorce and the end of our 8-year marriage. "So why are you calling me, Carla? You clearly preferred Craig's company, his personality, and his sex over mine. So you're right to call me and tell me about your problems ended 3 days ago. I repeat the same thing to you all the time, Michael James Dunson." Craig was just for sex. It had been almost 10 years since I'd been with anyone other than you, and I was just curious. The first time with him was terrible, but I thought it was just because he was nervous or something. My body does that to boys, you know. Anyway, he talked me into giving him another chance at my body, and you caught us and kicked me out. You didn't even give me a chance to explain anything. Just threw me out of the house that I chose, decorated, and turned into our home, like yesterday's trash. Yes, Carla, you have done everything in this house except pay for it. You sat on your perfect ass every day while I worked like crazy trying to provide for both of us and make you happy. And as soon as your clever lawyer got a decree allowing you to stay in the house because you were effectively homeless, you immediately brought Craig into my house. If it was just sex, why did you need to put him in my damn house? Because I've never been alone in my life, she cried. I moved from my parents' house to our house. I don't know how to be alone, and you left me. And Craig just sits there and leaves his mess all over the house. He gets it dirty faster than I can clean it up. And his nasty friends come all the time, and they don't leave. And there's no more food in the house, so I wanted to ask you to send the next child support payment sooner. Hell no, I barked. I could, but why should I do it? You've already received a lump sum payment equal to half of my savings account balance. I sent it to you before the trial because the terms had already been agreed upon. There's just no way you could spend $65,000 in 10 days. This is simply impossible. Craig bought a very expensive motorcycle, she sobbed. He also had it customized with several unique parts. I thought it would be good for us, and we could go on little trips. It might not have been as much fun as when you and I went out in the Mustang, but I was hoping that since you didn't want me anymore, maybe Craig would start treating me better. In other words, since you couldn't get your husband back, you wanted to make your lover a husband. But it didn't work, did it? Carla, sell this damn motorcycle. Call the police and evict Craig and his friends, and find yourself some simpleton you can control, I said. Well, I can't sell the motorcycle because he crashed it, and the rest of my money went to pay for part of the damage he caused in the accident. I still owe about $8,000. The police won't come because the neighbors have called them so many times that I don't think they'll listen to me. Basically, I'm just begging you to come back. You are the only man I love. I keep telling you that Craig was just fun, just an experiment that went horribly wrong. None of our friends want anything to do with me. They treat me like I'm a stupid bitch with a plague. Even my parents look at me like I'm a fool for letting you go. I just want us. Carla, it seems to me that I'm leaving the network coverage area. I'm driving through a tunnel. The connection is interrupted, I said, laughing and ending the call. For the first time in weeks, I felt really good. Much of my tension disappeared when I laughed. After another 5 minutes, laughing so hard I could barely control the car, I pulled off the highway and slowed to a near walking speed of 30 miles per hour to navigate the streets. My Mustang was often the subject of police attention, and my insurance premiums were already quite high. My premiums went up when I installed a supercharger, even though I didn't report it to the insurance company. I think they have psychics working for them. One smart cop also caught me when he looked under the car and found my illegal off-road X-pipe. I needed to find the only police officer in Michigan who was also a hot rod fan. There was also the problem that some cars, like my Mustang and Camaro, actually looked like they were moving when they were standing still. This was a problem that Chrysler muscle cars did not have. The Charger and Challenger were severely underpowered and so heavy and boat-shaped that they simply couldn't compete. Mopar means mostly old people and rednecks. I entered a large office building and stopped at the information desk. The building was huge, and I didn't want to get lost. The first meeting with Stephen Atherton was in my apartment. The security guard at the counter pointed me to a bank of elevators at the back of the building, and I headed towards them. I stepped into the waiting elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor. As soon as the doors began to close, I heard a voice asking me to hold the elevator. The elevator doors stopped closing as I reached between them. What happened next was one of those moments that had to be seen to be fully appreciated. The first thing I saw was a tiny foot in an open shoe. The toenails on this toe were painted the same shade of red as the interior of my Mustang. If that wasn't a sign, I don't know what was. Just seeing that leg made me. I already imagined massaging this leg and possibly kissing it as it was followed by the most beautiful foot I had ever seen. She wasn't thin and angular like my ex-wife's legs. She was slender and round, with good calves. That leg was followed by an even sexier thigh, which was unfortunately interrupted by a skirt that ended a couple of inches above the knees. At that moment, my idea of heaven was sandwiched between these thighs. Well-rounded hips led to a slightly rounded tummy that supported two massive breasts. She wore a short suit jacket that matched the skirt, creating a kind of feminine version of a business suit, but I could only imagine the kind of business she would be doing in that suit. Long, frothy black hair with a slight wave at the ends framed a face that, although not classically beautiful, was awe-inspiring. Her tanned face was adorned with a few freckles around her nose. I instantly wanted to kiss those full red lips and probably never stop. Her eyes were a deep brown color, and I imagined myself getting lost in them until I realized that she was calmly watching me stare at her. She didn't seem at all offended by my attention. On the contrary, she looked at me with an expression of amusement on her face. "Well, did you pass the test?" she asked. What? That's all I could say. My shock at being caught only amused her more. My face must have turned at least a couple of shades redder, which only deepened her smile. "Sorry," I finally squeezed out. "But you are so beautiful." "For a fat girl, that is," she interjected. "No, I meant just beautiful," I said seriously, without any reservations. "And you're not fat. At least I don't think so." At this moment, I became even more embarrassed. I think she sensed it because she let me go. "Well, it's nice to be admired," she said, smiling, and turned to the front of the elevator when it reached my floor. She also got off on this floor, but, fortunately, she went in the opposite direction from me. I couldn't help myself. Even though she had already caught me staring at her, I turned around again and watched her leave. I found that her ass was just as incredible as her breasts. As I watched her leave, all the blood quickly flowed from one head to the other. Unfortunately, she turned around when I didn't expect it and caught me examining her again. I simply waved goodbye to her and headed towards Atherton's office. I walked in and Atherton's secretary pointed to a chair. She was a slender, elderly woman whose expression made it clear to me that being a secretary was just a side hustle for her. She spoke into the phone on her desk and then looked at me. She made a big effort and the corners of her mouth turned up for a split second in an obvious attempt to smile. But she wasn't very good at it, and that only made her creepier. Then her mouth opened, and in a voice like nails on a blackboard, she said that Mr. Atherton would see me now. Atherton, on the other hand, was friendly, lively, and outgoing. He stood up as I entered the room and shook my hand vigorously, as if he expected me to save him from his secretary or take her with me when I left. Mike Dunson, he told me, as if I either didn't know my own name or he needed to say it to refresh my memory. Would you like something to drink? How about coffee? He suggested. I said I was fine and just wanted to know what information he found for me. Well, as you thought, this is a very valuable thing. I believe we can make good money from this at a gun fair or knife show. But there may be a way to earn even more if you are willing to consider other opportunities, he said, studying me. I got the impression that he was trying to read me and adapting his offer depending on what he thought I wanted to hear. I didn't know if he was trying to come up with a better plan for my interests or his own, but either way, I wanted to hear both options and decide for myself. I'm open to all possibilities, so let's listen to both plans, I said. Well, we need to wait. He began before being interrupted by his intercom ringing. Mr. Atherton, your second client has arrived, the secretary said shrilly through the speaker on Atherton's desk. I wondered how he could stand this woman. Working with her would drive me crazy. Send her here, he said sharply into the speaker. The office door opened and Atherton stood up again to greet his new visitor. I was sure the look on my face and the sound of my jaw hitting the floor were noticeable. The woman from the elevator entered the room and sat down in the chair next to me. She looked at me with the same amused expression before turning her eyes to Atherton and shaking his hand. Mike Dunson, let me introduce you to Miss Samantha Chaveria, Atherton said. It was an extremely formal performance. Atherton was clearly old school. We've already met, briefly, I said, extending my hand. She took my hand and shook it gently, leaving me to admire the softness of her skin and the warmth of her body as she looked into my eyes. I found myself thinking that if the rest of her body was as warm as this, I would never be able to let her out of bed. Suddenly, I realized that she was talking to me. I just told you that you can let go of my hand any time you want, she said, smiling at me. Sorry, I said. I was glad that at least this time she didn't catch me examining her breasts. Okay, let's get down to business, Atherton said. Mr. Dunson, the thing that you want to liquidate has aroused great interest from many different people. You have many options on what to do with it. Miss Chaveria represents one such interest and has a vested interest in it. She has decided not to express her preferences until you hear other suggestions. As Atherton spoke, I could hear cash registers ringing in the background. Sharing my fortune and my home with my sneaky, cheating ex left me feeling like I urgently needed a quick influx of cash to start building my retirement nest again. One of the pistols you found in the attic was authenticated and actually belonged to your great-great-grandfather Samuel Dunson. It was the same 1874 Schofield in .44 caliber with an ivory handle. It usually costs between $40,000 and $50,000 on the open market. My heart sank. It was good money, especially since I'm not into guns, and it would almost make up for the amount I lost to Carla, but not quite. In addition, the fact that only one of the pistols was valuable was a little upsetting. I believed that one of the pistols was my great-great-grandfather's work pistol, and the other was his special pistol for special occasions. The other gun is actually more valuable because it belonged to your great-great-uncle Jack Dunson. Laughing Jack was an outlaw who eventually became the sheriff of the same small town. This is the same 1874 Schofield in .44 caliber with an ebony handle. Together, these pistols are worth almost twice as much because the brothers led an unusual lifestyle. If we sell them to a private collector, we could get up to $200,000. However, I believe our best option is to wait until next month when the military and firearms auction takes place and put them up for auction. This carries significant risks, but on the other hand, in a full-blown betting battle, you could become a very rich man. Again his eyes followed me, and I wondered if he was more worried about me becoming rich or about himself. Its share will be significant in any case. How much do you know about the history of your ancestors? He asked. Well, not very much, I said. And in this mischief area can help us because, you see, she, like the fourth partner in our little syndicate, is partly related to you. He shook his head, seeing the shock on our faces. If you go back far enough, I guess everyone on the planet is partly related to someone else, he added. We have enough time before our dinner meeting to start this story. We'll probably finish it next time. He went to the closet and pulled out 3 old books. Although their skin was faded and cracked, they were in very good condition. I have marked certain passages in each book so that when read in sequence, you will get the whole story without getting confused by different and confusing points of view, he said. And then I started reading. Excerpt from the Diary of Samuel Danson, May 4th, 1875. I arrived in Navarro, Texas this morning, tired and hungry from a long drive. It seems like a pretty nice city, but I'm not sure I'll stay here long. This didn't seem like a place where I could settle down and build my life. This morning's misunderstanding in the town square only confirmed to me that I had more reasons for running away than Arabella's refusal to marry me. Jack's reputation had spread so far into Texas that several townspeople mistook me for him and were immediately afraid of me. The city sheriff approached me and tried to arrest me. I had to show him a letter I received from the U.S. Marshal's office, signed by the local judge, explaining that Jack and I were twins and that I had never robbed or stolen anything. I don't think he really believed me, but he recognized the judge's signature and decided to take it on faith. As long as I don't fool around or cause trouble in his city while I'm here. The area around the city seems quite picturesque, and there don't seem to be any problems here. This might have been a good place to settle down if Jack hadn't gotten to this region before I did. The biggest problem for me is that I'm running out of money, and there doesn't seem to be much work around here, unless of course you work in a brothel or saloon. I don't want to do either one or the other. None of the big ranches in the area are hiring right now, so I'll probably move on tomorrow. Excerpt from the Diary of Samuel Danson, the 6th of May. Maybe I'll stay here for a while. Yesterday, I was leaving the boarding house where I was staying and saw the sheriff talking to a group of suspicious characters. I started walking in their direction just as one of them tried to pass the sheriff from behind. The one standing in front of the sheriff began to become rude and reached for his weapon. The sheriff shot him in the shoulder, but whoever was behind was about to shoot the sheriff in the back. I had no choice. I pulled out my revolver and shot him in the hand. It was a clean and difficult shot from that distance. I just shot him in the arm. He will survive, but will no longer be able to fully use this arm. I sincerely regret that I injured the person, but I had no choice. It was either that or let him shoot the sheriff in the back and kill him. I think that's the main difference between me and Jack. Jack simply does whatever it takes to get what he wants, no matter who it hurts. I'm just not strong or determined enough to hurt someone for the sake of my happiness. In any case, I expected to be put in jail, or at least kicked out of town, since it is illegal to shoot within the city limits. But the people in town seemed to think I had done the right thing, and the sheriff agreed with them. I offered to turn in my gun until I left town, but he said if I hadn't had it on me at that moment, he probably would have been dead, and he asked if I would like to help him as his deputy. When I agreed, he gave me a new badge and a thick book of laws. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to stay here and even save a little to eventually afford his own ranch. Excerpt from the Diary of Samuel Danson, June 6th. I haven't written much because it's been pretty boring here so far. Every day seems the same. I take drunks from the saloon to the jail so they can sober up. Then the next morning I make them pay fines and let them go. Sometimes it seems like the same people get drunk every night, and their fines are more like paying rent to keep a roof over their heads at night. Lord, the fine is cheaper than a boarding house or hotel, so I can start drinking myself. However, something interesting is happening now, although I'm not sure how seriously to take it. One of the women working at the boarding house seemed interested in me. She is a very beautiful Mexican girl with long dark hair and beautiful brown eyes. I might have loved her too if I weren't still unsure of my feelings for women after all these troubles with Arabella. One thing's for sure, I haven't thought about Arabella in weeks, so maybe I really am forgetting her. Excerpt from the Diary of Samuel Danson, June 16th. Today, everything has changed. My life is going in a completely different direction than I imagined. One of the duties the sheriff assigned me was to greet new arrivals. When the stagecoach arrives, I meet them and help them get their bearings and get settled. One of the new arrivals today was Miss Constance Farmwell. She will be the new teacher at the church school. She is 22 years old, has blonde hair and blue eyes. She is very slim and tall for a woman, and probably the most beautiful I have ever seen. She is the woman I would marry. The problem is that she looks exactly like Arabella, maybe a little taller and a little smaller in the chest, but otherwise they could be twins. Perhaps all women with these facial features look the same. Unfortunately, although I spent a lot of time with her, helping her more than any other newcomer, even women, she did not seem to notice me. She kept forgetting my name and bumping into me by accident. Perhaps there is no romance in my future. Excerpt from Constance Farmwell's diary, June 16, 1875. I arrived in Navarro, Texas early this morning to start a new life. Leaving the East was the best decision for me, since my family's reputation was completely destroyed by my father and brother's addictions to public drinking and gambling. After my father lost our family home in a card game, I had no choice but to look elsewhere for my life. A friendly priest from our parish area knew a priest here in town. The priest here, Father Thompson, appears to be opening a school as this small town strives to become a legitimate city. Since my prospects in the East have been extremely limited, this may be a great decision for me. We, stagecoach passengers, were met at the station by the most extraordinary man I have ever seen. He's a deputy sheriff. His name is Sam Dunson. The first time he looked at me, my heart started dancing. He is a tall, slender, handsome man with steel-colored eyes and a truly helpful personality. I did everything I could to keep him by my side today long after he helped the other passengers. I even pretended to be a little distracted to keep him near me. I wish I was a man sometimes so I could be more straightforward and stop playing these ridiculous games, but that's what society expects from a modern 19th century woman. As he accompanied me around the city, I noticed that one dark-haired girl who worked at the boarding house was not too happy about me spending time with him. I will pray for her, because he is not married to her and may soon be married to me if I have the opportunity to speak out on this matter. I wonder what kind of house we will build and where. How much does a sheriff's deputy earn? June 18th. Today, I finally moved into a room at the church. I couldn't stay in this boarding house any longer. It seems that everything was against me there. From day one, I had problems with the staff there, especially with this little Mexican girl. When I first got to my room, I needed a bath to soothe my back and sore muscles after a terrible stagecoach ride. I swear it felt like all my insides and lady parts were going to be shaken out from all the pushing and shaking. After the women brought the bathtub into the room and filled it with hot water, complaining and grumbling the whole way, I began to undress. As soon as I stepped into the bathtub, I noticed that for some reason they filled it not with warm water, as I asked, but with almost ice-cold water with foam on top. The water was also not fresh. It smelled like they had cleaned fish in it. I was so tired that I didn't notice how cold the water was until I sat in it, only to practically jump out as soon as my bottom and tender parts almost froze on contact. Unfortunately, at that moment the door to my room mysteriously swung open. It was extremely unfortunate timing that a group of card players were just passing by my room, while I was standing completely naked with the door open. They screamed and cackled and stared at me until I closed and slammed the door. I had to shout downstairs for a bowl of fresh water to wash the fishy smell off me, and of course, several hours passed before they brought fresh water. Over the past 2 days at the boarding house, everything had gone wrong for me. My stay here at the church is much more comfortable, and my luck seems to have improved. June 19th. Today, the city is faced with a terrible tragedy. The town doesn't have a real bank yet, So until now, all the money people wanted to save was kept in small safe deposit boxes under their names in the saloon. Construction of the bank and post office, which will also serve as a telegraph office, began last week. I guess some of the criminals in the area wanted to steal the money before it was placed in the safe. They robbed the saloon. Someone called the sheriff, and he went there. There were 5 armed men against the sheriff and his deputy. None of the criminals survived. The bad news for the city was that the sheriff was killed by one of the bandits. As far as I'm concerned, he was the longest-serving sheriff anyone can remember. He worked for just under 10 months. Less than 10 minutes after the firefight ended, a unanimous election took place. Sam was elected as the new sheriff. His first official duty was to bury the old sheriff. I'm afraid for him. Once I can convince him that he is meant for me, I must persuade him to choose another profession. He always reads that law book, and the town really needs a lawyer. Let some other fool be sheriff. One more thing. After the shootout ended, my rival for Sam's attention ran towards my man and pressed her big breasts against him. I may have to take a more aggressive approach in my attempts to win over Sam Dunson. The dangers of his current profession and the increasingly obvious attack from competition, plus the fact that Sam is now the town's sheriff, seem to require it. Add to this the fact that every single woman in the city, some married and even easily accessible girls, are after my man. Excerpt from the Diary of Samuel Danson, April 4th, 1876. I guess with all the changes in my life over the last 8 or 9 months, I really should have written more. But since I became sheriff, everything moves so fast that I barely have time to breathe, let alone write. I now have 3 deputies. They are all relatives of Maria Chavarria, that beautiful little Mexican girl who used to work at the boarding house and now takes care of the sheriff's office and the jail. No one wanted to take on a deputy job after the last sheriff was killed last year, but she somehow convinced her cousins that it was a great opportunity. At first, the townspeople weren't too happy about it, given the race relations at the time, but since they valued their safety and none of them were ready to work, they reluctantly agreed. There are only a few weeks left before my wedding. It's strange to think that just a year after the Arabella fiasco, I'm engaged again. What's even stranger is that I have absolutely no idea how this happened. I know things move fast these days, but damn, I love Constance much more than I loved Arabella anyway. May 15th. I thought that my wedding day with Constance would be the happiest day of my life. My parents would be proud that at least one of their sons is making something of himself. The city gave me a house and 100 acres of land. In fact, the land is quite good, and the previous owner died and no one else laid claim to it. So I could have taken it anyway, but they decided to give it to me. Not that I see her much since I have to stay close to town most of the time, but Constance might live there, and I'll hire some ranch hands in a few months and start trying to raise some cattle. Then in a few years, I will retire and run the ranch full-time. In any case, the enjoyment of my wedding day was greatly overshadowed by the bedtime. Constance came to my bed a virgin, but she didn't shed many tears, and by morning I was exhausted, and she'd tried every trick in my bedroom repertoire, including a few I'd learned from easily accessible girls. Being married to her will never be boring, especially at night. I received a letter from Arabella in which she said that she had changed her mind and wanted me to return as soon as possible, or that I should send for her to join me. News of my success apparently convinced her parents and herself to overlook the fact that my twin brother was a notorious horse thief and bank robber. It seems like the news of my wedding hasn't reached her yet, and I can't say I didn't smile as I wrote a rather gloating letter telling her that her chance had passed and I was already married. Good riddance. She broke my heart, so she deserved me to prick her pride. July 8th. I will be a father. These words still sound strange even to me. I keep thinking that I'll wake up and find out it's all a mistake, but every day Constance gets a little bigger and I love her more. 12th of August. I am extremely glad that I am writing this after the events of recent days. Rumors spread throughout the area about a large gang of criminals located nearby. Until I knew better, I ordered everyone in the area to spend the night in the city. I organized patrols to monitor the situation and understand how many people they had and what their intentions were. It would take too long to send a request to the Texas Rangers if we didn't know when these thugs were coming. Unfortunately, they showed up much earlier than we were ready. The six of them just drove into town like they didn't care and headed straight to the bank. They came in and took all the money. When I encountered them, they were simply driving through the city streets, not trying to escape, as if nothing bothered them. A guy rode ahead on a big, beautiful Arabian stallion. This horse was simply magnificent. I say it was because I came around the corner and shot her with a gun. When she fell, she hit two men on horses riding right behind her. Then I took out my .44 and shot the two men who fell on either side of the guy on the dead horse. I then took aim at him as he tried to get up and shot him. You deserve it, you bastard. Not only for robbing a bank, but also for riding such a fancy horse. I would never shoot a good, honest Mustang. The remaining three bandits slowly took out their revolvers and took aim at me, when suddenly another 10 or 12 scoundrels flew into the city. They were dragging my two deputies along for fun. At that moment, looking into the barrels of three revolvers, I thought that my days were numbered. I will never see my child born. It's not in your best interest to shoot the sheriff, Bart, the voice said. Especially because before his body hits the ground, I will shoot you. I think you'd better let me and the sheriff talk for a while. In the meantime, return the money back to the bank. I said that we came here for fun, not for work. If Bart had any doubts, he didn't show them. He immediately holstered his revolver, smiled at me, and walked back to the bank, with three friends following behind him. The man who had spoken to him earlier dismounted and approached me. Even with a bandana covering the lower half of his face, I recognized him, especially because his face was almost identical to what I see in the mirror every morning. When he took off his bandana and looked at me, a smile appeared on my face, and people who were watching from windows or around corners were shocked and came outside. Even today, seeing a pair of identical twins can be quite scary. "Sheriff, your wife is coming here," one of the townspeople shouted. "Jack, let's play a joke," I whispered, sitting down opposite him in the saloon. I quickly took his black hat and pulled it over his face, throwing him my white hat, which he immediately put on. Constance ran into the saloon, forgetting for a moment that normally she would never have appeared there. She was very pregnant, but still incredibly beautiful, and every man in the saloon looked at her with lust. She quickly walked up to Jack, thinking it was me, and kissed him on the lips. Jack didn't know how to react. "I just heard, I'm so glad you're alive," she said. "When you come home today, I'll show you how happy I am." "Won't your husband be against this?" I asked from under Jack's hat, still covering my face. "This is my husband," she answered sharply. Then, perhaps it was her feminine instincts or fate, I don't know, but she looked at Jack again. Then she took off his hat and looked carefully at his face. "Who are you?" she asked him. Jack and I both laughed at the same time. I took off Jack's hat and gave it back to him, while Constance just looked at us both. I don't think she liked the joke. The 6th of September. I should really try to write in this journal more often. Nothing special happens. The city gradually got used to the fact that a well-known gang seemed to have settled in our city. In fact, after many years of separation, I enjoy my brother's company. He makes sure that all his men behave themselves within the city, but the truth is that on several occasions their presence has proven beneficial. For example, 2 weeks ago, we heard about a group of cowboys who had just returned from driving their cattle to the railroad junction to sell. They drove back home and made noise and misbehaved in every town they passed through. I don't mind cowboys with pockets full of money coming into our town and spending it. And we all know working cattle is hard work, so they need something to relax after weeks on the road. But they destroyed some small towns and showed no signs that they intended to calm down. There were about 25 of them, and my deputies and I could not cope with them. As usual, by the time the Texas Rangers could send a few men to help us, they would already be gone. So, as usual, my deputies and I rode out to meet them before they reached the city. We took up a position on the road about half a mile from town and waited. They stopped when they got to us and asked what was the matter. We explained to them that our small town was a family community, and while we would be happy to see them, there were certain rules in town. I began laying out the rules, which included turning in all firearms upon entering the city. Their revolvers will be returned to them when they leave. They listened to me calmly, and I thought that everything was going well, until one of the biggest of them said, "What will happen if I don't give up my weapons? What if I want to get drunk and run around? What if I want to sleep with every one bitch in the city right on the street? What then, Sheriff?" He took a deep drag from his cigar and stared at me, then put the cigar back in his mouth. Before he had time to notice that I had moved, I had drawn my revolver and shot into his cigar, leaving the ragged end very close to his lips. I didn't have time to mention that smoking near children is also prohibited in the city, I said calmly. "You may be good with a revolver, Sheriff," he said. "I won't deny that you could probably kill me or any of us. But the problem is that you don't have enough firepower, and your deputies look so nervous that I don't think they're ready for a shootout over something as minor as my boys and I wanting to have some fun. So we can have a little fun and change your town however we want. We'll leave you some money on the way out, and everything will be fine." "Is everything all right in Priceville?" I asked. "This was the city you passed through 2 days ago. From what I heard, there were several women there who were not easily accessible and who were greatly offended. Property was stolen or destroyed. People were beaten simply because they stood up for their families or friends. We don't need such guests, so either you obey my rules or you don't enter the city." "Again, Sheriff," he yelled, "you just don't have enough people to stop us from riding into your little town and doing whatever we want, so." Before he could finish speaking, we all heard a group of horsemen approaching us. Jack and his men pulled up right behind us. "Sorry for being late. Did I miss something?" Jack asked politely. "Who the hell are you?" blurted out the cowboy. "It's Bloody Jack Dunson. I saw his picture on the wanted poster," said one of the cowboys. "Damn it, it's him," said another. Jack lowered his mask and rode up to the big cowboy and took one of his cigars. "Is there fire?" he asked. After the cowboy lit a cigar for Jack, Jack asked him, "What's the problem?" "I was just telling the sheriff that." The cowboy began. "You're talking about my brother, my twin," Jack interrupted. "It's hard to make a man's face, tanned from days of riding in the hot Texas sun, turn white, but the cowboy's face became several shades lighter when he heard Jack explain who I was. He then looked at both of our faces and stared at the ground. He was just telling me that his 25 cowboys outweighed me and my 3 deputies, I said. "Well, your deputies are pretty good," Jack began. "They're not as good as you and me, but they're not bad. In case you were wondering, cowboy, my brother is a very good shot with both a pistol and a rifle. I'm a little faster, but he's more accurate. So we have me and my 15 people, plus my brother and his 3. Damn it, there are still fewer of us than you. But our 20 people are used to fighting for their lives every day. Your people are half drunk and used to chasing cows. Half of them seem to have never shot at anything other than tin cans. I think I like those odds." We all heard several cowboys swallow loudly and look at their boss. "Of course, we'll probably lose a couple of people in the fight," I began. "But you will all die, every one of you," Jack finished, as twins often do when they finish each other's sentences. "If you insist on such inhospitality, we will take our business elsewhere," said the cowboy. He turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, taking all his men with him. After this, Jack and his men settled in the city. They lived in a hotel and boarding house. I can't say that there weren't any incidents, but when they happened, everything was resolved fairly, and they spent the night in prison and paid fines like everyone else. Everything was going well until a few months after my son was born. Constance Danson Diary, March 14th. Dear Diary, I must admit that I still have a problem. Since the 6th month of pregnancy, I have felt like a bitch in heat. I often pounce on Sam as soon as he gets home. I don't know what came over me. It's been a month since I gave birth to John Jack, who we named after his grandfather and uncle. I'm looking forward to Sam coming home tonight so we can start trying for another baby. It's hard to believe how much my life plans have changed since I met Sam. I used to dream of becoming a teacher or a businesswoman, but now I only want to be a wife and mother. I especially love being a mother, and I especially love the process that leads to it. I have to admit, my waist may have grown an inch or two, and my breasts aren't as high as they were before the baby was born, but Sam doesn't seem to care, and no one in town seems to have noticed. All the men still watch my every move when I go out into the city. April 3rd. Dear Diary, the problem seems to have gotten worse. Sam and I start as soon as I put the baby to bed. Last night he made love to me almost all night, stopping only for a few minutes of sleep. In the morning he left for work, still tired from our activities. I feel sorry for him, because in his profession you need to be fully conscious, and any hitch could be fatal. I also feel guilty because, God, I'm sorry, I just wasn't enough. Lately, I have been having a constant itch down there that needs to be scratched. In a way, I blame Sam for this, because before him, I was a God-fearing virgin until he took my virginity and started all this. April 9th. God, forgive me for what I did. This morning, Jack came into the house looking for Sam, and I only let him see me in my nightgown. I thought his eyes would pop out of their sockets. I simply smiled at him, which could be taken as an invitation. He started coming towards me, and I was ready for him. But then he shook his head and told me to pull myself together and stop acting like an easy girl. Despite how much I love Sam, I shudder to think what might have happened if it had been any other man other than his brother. May 2nd. My life is over. Last week, I cheated on my husband. It all started innocently. A stranger came to the ranch while I was taking a bath. A tall, gruff man who clearly liked what he saw. I hated it at first sight, but my itch would not let me rest. He was looking for Jack. I do not know why. Someone is always looking for Jack. Half of them want to kill him in a gunfight to avenge someone he hurt or killed, or to make a reputation for themselves by killing him. The others want to join his gang. I didn't know if this man was a fighter or wanted to join, but I invited him into the house. I wish it hadn't happened, but I did it, and now there's no turning back. He's not a handsome man like Sam or Jack. Plus, he's a little overweight. But the worst thing is that he absolutely does not know how to handle his equipment as well as my Sam. He was so inept in bed that I would never have thought to try it with anyone other than Sam. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. The worst part was that when Sam came home that night, ready to wear me out, I had to pretend I was tired from the night before so he wouldn't see the bruises on my ass. The next day, the man, Cletus, returned just as Sam left for town. I told him Jack wasn't home, but he came in anyway. He wanted what he got yesterday. I told him no, but he just smiled at me and asked if I wanted Sam to know what I gave him. I'd never heard that term before, but whatever it meant, I didn't want Sam to know. So I made him promise not to leave bruises, and I gave him what he wanted. The next day he returned again, but not alone. He brought another man, and they both made love to me. For a woman who a week ago was itching to make love, I began to hate the thought of it. Over the course of several days, Cletus developed a pattern. He would arrive as soon as Sam left, and sometimes bring 3 or 4 men with him. I found out much later that he was charging them for the opportunity to make love to me. I saw no way out of my dilemma, but fate intervened to give me a break. Cletus met Jack in town one morning and a shootout began. Jack, from what I've heard, isn't as accurate with a weapon as Sam, but he's faster than lightning. Luckily for me, Cletus died a few hours later. I swore that I would never cheat on Sam again as long as I lived. But a week later, the itching returned, and I fought it with all my might. My misfortune continued when I went shopping at the general store and ran into one of the men Cletus was bringing to the ranch. Now that he knew who I really was, other than the bitch Cletus, he wanted to get to know me better. Around this time, life started to go south for both Sam and I. My situation worsened because men were now coming to the ranch almost every day, and unlike Cletus, some of them did not want to leave when it was time for Sam to return home. It seemed that rumors of a woman who did what even prostitutes refused to do, and did it for free, had spread throughout the city. Atherton stopped reading the diaries when we heard a beep from the intercom on his desk. Samantha and I stretched and looked at each other. We were so engrossed in history that we lost track of time and forgot where we were. "Miss Peyton from the auction house is here," said the sarcastic voice of Atherton's secretary over the intercom. "Please invite her," Atherton replied. He straightened up, straightened his tie, and checked his shirt for wrinkles. After a few moments, I realized why. Miss Peyton was tall and slender, with long blonde hair. She had a beautiful smile and used it often. She could easily be mistaken for one of the Playboy models that every man dreams of. Atherton acted like a puppy around her. I expected him to drop to the floor and kneel with his hands clasped like a dog asking for a treat, tongue hanging out. Of course, she would have to pat him on the head and say, "Good boy." I would have places where she could pet me too, but I wasn't going to roll around on the floor to get her to do it. Samantha cleared her throat loudly and looked up. Her beautiful eyes narrowed dangerously, but I couldn't tell whether they were directed at Atherton or me. "I'm sorry," Atherton said. "I would like to introduce you to Miss Diana Peyton of Waterhouse Western Memorabilia Auctions. She is interested in offering your items at an upcoming auction. She is confident that that is, you, can make significantly more money if we put Mrs. Diaries together. Mr. Danson's Chavarias and weapons as a single set. We can also generate interest in the items by displaying them on her website." Miss Peyton gave Samantha a small smile and then turned her attention completely to me. When she smiled at me, despite her beauty, for some reason I remembered a huge snake. I also noticed two things. First, she must have had more than 32 teeth to have such a wide smile, and second, she looked a lot like my ex-wife. "It's quite late. I'd like to invite you to dinner, and we could discuss my proposal over food," she said, looking straight at me. "Of course, I mean all of us," she added, turning to Samantha. We all got into Miss Peyton's large BMW sedan. The inside of the car was so spacious and luxurious that it felt like we were sitting in someone's living room. The ride was so smooth that I couldn't feel the road below us. Surprisingly, I felt uncomfortable as I was used to feeling the road and faster acceleration. This car seemed to float like an airship. I also didn't like the seating arrangement. Miss Peyton opened the door and herded Samantha and Atherton into the back seat, then closed the door. I wondered why, because there would be enough space for me. I ended up in the front seat with her. Halfway through, she tried a cheap teenage trick. She put her hand on the gear shift, even though the car was automatic, then lowered her hand from the lever to mine. She smiled at me as she did this. What was she up to? I also used a cheap trick, smiled back at her, and then pretended to yawn and used my hand to cover my mouth. She repeated this trick at the restaurant. Somehow it happened that Atherton was sitting next to Samantha, and I ended up next to Miss Peyton. To make matters worse, I was sitting directly across from Atherton, who was looking at me as if I was in his way. Samantha didn't look happy either. In fact, the only person who smiled was Miss Peyton. She smiled like a shark or like a lioness who has separated her prey from the herd. During dinner, she laid out her plan. She will begin advertising and promoting these items to generate interest before the auction opens. She will take photographs to post on the internet and write an article about them for all military and Western magazines. With this kind of publicity, we will surely attract many buyers who will be able to pay good money for these items, and we will all make a lot of money. Miss Peyton was rubbing her leg hard against mine under the table. I tried to move away from her, but within reason, so as not to look stupid. My mind was already starting to tell me that I should agree. Samantha dropped her fork and bent down to pick it up, glancing at what was happening under the table. When she returned to her seat, she glared at me, but Miss Peyton simply smiled at her and didn't stop. She had to admit she was confident. My phone rang, breaking the atmosphere before another stupid thing could happen. I looked at the screen and saw Carla's face. "What?" I asked sharply. "You didn't call me back," Carla replied petulantly. "I need." She started, but I hung up. This was enough to give me the motivation to pull my foot away from Miss Peyton as if she were covered in mud. I looked for a distraction and noticed that on the other side of the hall, a small quartet was playing soft music. "I need to go to the toilet," I said. Atherton winced at the expression, Samantha smiled, and Miss Peyton looked disappointed. She moved to let me out of the booth and ran her hand over my ass as I walked past. Now I understand how women feel. It felt like she was testing my muscles to see how fit I was. During my short visit to the restroom, I was able to calm down and put myself in order again. I tried to understand what was happening. Miss Peyton clearly wanted my items for her auction house. It seemed like she also wanted to see if my other item would fit her. Atherton seemed to want to make money from me and also to get Miss Peyton. I felt from him the resentment of a rejected lover. The only one of the participants whose motives I could not understand was Samantha. What interest did she have in all this? I needed to figure out her game too. When I returned to the table, I had an idea. "Wow, I want to dance," I said. Before Miss Peyton could stand, I extended my hand to Samantha. "I don't really like dancing," she said quietly. "I love to dance," Miss Peyton quickly interjected, trying to break into the situation. "I hated women like that. She's probably a ballroom dancing champion in her spare time." "Is it true?" I asked, smiling at her with my evil smile. "Atherton, dance with Miss Peyton." Atherton jumped up so quickly that I expected to see a rocket up his ass. He grabbed Miss Peyton by the hand and pulled her onto the small dance floor. I took Samantha's hand and led her in the other direction. There was a small terrace behind the restaurant, and the moon brightly illuminated everything around. "Why aren't you enjoying your evening?" I asked her. "This bitch is clearly trying to exclude me from everything," she replied. "I think she doesn't think the diaries are important. She doesn't like my plan either. She just wants to make a ton of money and move on to the next conquest." "So what's your plan?" I asked again. "I haven't heard anything from you yet." "I wanted to wait until you heard the whole story from the diaries, so you knew everything our families did, so you could think about what I was going to say. That way you would know all the facts and be able to make an informed decision. I don't want you to make hasty decisions that you will regret later." I thought about her words. She seemed to be the only one of the three who did not try to impose her agenda on me. Maybe because she really cared about what I wanted, or because her way was less attractive than the other two options. "Do you want to dance?" I asked. It was quite romantic on the terrace, and the music was barely audible, but the view and moonlight more than made up for the lack of sound. She smiled and nodded. I gently hugged her and took her hand. Looking into her eyes, I thought I could drown in them. Something was clearly happening between us, but I didn't understand what exactly. "Now I understand how she felt," she told me. "Who is she?" I asked, perplexed by her words. "You'll soon find out," she said, resting her head on my shoulder, and somehow it felt right. I pulled her closer, connecting our bodies in a more intimate embrace. I couldn't help but look into her deep brown eyes and think that I wanted to wake up next to her for the rest of my life. "Are you married or dating someone?" I asked, knowing how stupid it sounded. "Of course not," she replied, again leaving me perplexed. "I'm a practice girl." "What does a girl mean for practice?" I asked. This woman knew how to confuse me. Guys try out all their lines and move on to someone like me, and then marry someone like Miss Peyton. I'm pretty enough that they don't feel embarrassed to be seen with me in public, but they think because I'm a little plumper, then I will be available to their demands because they showed me a little consideration, she said. When they realize they have to work to get into my pants, they leave, so I'm single, and although I'm dating, there's no serious relationship. "Are you accepting applications?" I asked, and she smiled. We seemed attracted to each other like magnets. I could practically feel her soft lips and wondered what she would taste like. But these were just dreams. "Hey, no talking business without the rest of the group," Miss Peyton said sharply. "We've been looking for you too. Stevie says you'll meet at his office tomorrow to finish reading the diaries, and then we can make a final decision and sign the papers. I'll take you back to his office." She then looked straight at me and added, "or wherever you want to go." Samantha heard it too. When we got back to the Atherton building, Miss Peyton pulled right into the parking lot. "Drop me next to that dark blue car," Samantha said. Miss Peyton pulled up in front of the blue car, and my heart sank as Samantha stepped out. I also got out and walked around the car. "Oh my God, she's beautiful," I said, walking further around the car. "It's a girl." "Me too," Samantha said. 2009 Mustang, midnight blue, pony package, optional 18-inch chrome bullet wheels, I said, whistling. Samantha smiled as I admired her car. "Hey, what about my BMW?" asked Miss Peyton. "If you like cars, you can ride in one." "What do you mean my car is a girl?" Samantha asked, as if she hadn't heard Miss Peyton. "It's a V6. Less power means a girl. Still a pony, just a mare instead of a stallion," I said, smiling at her. "How did you know it was 2009? She asked. "Oh, that's too easy," I started. "Your car is clearly an S197 model. These cars were produced from 2005 to the present, with retro styling. There are two series of these cars. Cars from 2005 to 29 have perpendicular headlight bezels on the front, with the exception of the Shelby GT 500. Cars from 2010 to 2011 have angled headlight bezels and that ugly trim piece along the bottom of the car. They also have the angled rear end, which I hate. Your car is from 2005 to 2009 like mine. You also have the anniversary badge on the front fender, which means it's 2009. You only have one exhaust pipe and no GT badges, so it's a V6, I said proudly. The 2011 models also have dual exhaust pipes for the V6, so it gets harder to tell. "What about my BMW? Do you like it too?" Miss Peyton complained. "It runs smoothly and costs a lot of money." "Same as gender reassignment, but I don't want that either," I answered sharply. "Honestly, I'm sure it's good for those who like them, but I just don't like European sedans. If I was looking for a car for an old man, I'd rather get the new Lincoln MKZ." Miss Peyton slumped her shoulders, clearly upset that we were unimpressed with her sedan. But sharks, as they say, must keep swimming, or they will drown, so she just kept hitting. "Can you come to my hotel room? I have ideas for decorating your guns," she asked, just before Samantha left. Judging by Samantha's gaze through the car window, I knew she had heard the request. Unfortunately, she didn't hear my answer when she left. The next morning, Atherton's secretary, clearly having practiced her smiles, invited me into her office. Her smile was still strange, more like the expression of someone who had eaten Sour Patch Kids candy. I remember these things from childhood. They are so sour that this is the exact expression you get when you put one in your mouth. Apparently, I was the last one to arrive. Samantha looked at me sadly when I entered. I wanted to go and sit next to her to find out what was bothering her, but I was intercepted by Miss Peyton, who grabbed my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Last night was wonderful," leading me to a chair. I noticed that she sat down between me and Samantha. "Where are we staying?" asked Atherton. "Oh yeah, I marked the spot." Then he began to read, and we made ourselves comfortable. Sam Dunson's diary, May 4th. "Something strange is happening, but I don't know what." The tramp, who had been in the city for about a week, refused to surrender his weapon. Even worse, he publicly challenged me to a duel in a saloon. I could not allow him to leave the weapon, and I could not back down from the challenge, as this would undermine my authority in the city. I've dealt with troubled characters before, but this guy really pissed me off. It was not only his attitude, but also his words. One of them particularly bothered me and made the back of my head itch at the same time. "Why should I listen to you when you can't even get your wife to keep her legs together?" he asked. Several men in the back of the saloon tried to hold back their laughter, but everything died down when we went outside. Usually, I try to simply wound or disarm my opponent when necessary, but this time I was furious. I'm not as fast as my brother, but I'm faster than most and very accurate. He was the first to reach for his gun, but he didn't stand a chance. Before he even touched the handle, I fired my .44. Some of those who were laughing in the saloon lowered their eyes and could not see my gaze. I understood that something was happening, but I didn't know what. Constance Danson Diary, May 6th. My life is truly over. Something terrible happened today. Instead of coming one at a time, the men came all at once. I heard them say they just wanted to get theirs and leave. For some reason, none of them wanted to risk staying here when Sam returned. I was just another bitch. At that moment, I only wanted to die, and I almost died. I heard the door open and the room became cold, but not from a draft. It was the same cold that they say one feels when death is near. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. The door opened and Jack entered the room. He looked at me, then at the men. Before any of them knew what was happening, Jack shot the 5 men. 5 shots in less than 3 seconds. When he started shooting, I closed my eyes, feeling death whistling around me. When I opened them, I was looking straight into the barrel of Jack's gun, and from the look in his eyes, I realized that he might not have finished yet. He was just pausing. "Go ahead, do it," I said, then started crying uncontrollably. The sound of Jack's gunfire brought a couple of his men into the room. Jack calmly reloaded his gun to be ready for the next fight and looked at me again. I was no longer beautiful. "Get out of here," Jack told his men. "Wait," he ordered one of them. "Go find Juan Chavarria, that fat deputy who works for my brother. Bring him here as soon as possible." He then slammed the door. "You stupid bitch," he told me. "You're ruining my brother, and I won't let that happen. 4 people have died in the city since yesterday because of you. Those 5 make 9. You're not worth another death." "What are you talking about, Jack?" I asked him. "I haven't heard about this. Sam didn't tell me much about his work. He was kind of quiet last night. He didn't even want to make love to me, but I needed it. After being had and abused all day, I needed to feel loved and needed." Sam had a strange look in his eyes, as if he wanted to ask something but wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. So we just left it. Yesterday, some guy challenged Sam to a duel downtown. My brother doesn't usually kill anyone. That's the difference between him and me. He just doesn't have the nerves of steel to kill. But he killed this guy because he was pissed off about it. "What he said about you," said Jack. He looked at me again. "Today was worse. Another guy you had sex with was also called Sam, but he was smarter. Sam shot him, but the guy's friend was behind Sam and tried to shoot him with a shotgun. Sam heard him and started turning around, but he was too late and he shot," said Jack. I felt like my world had collapsed. My husband, the only man I had ever loved, was dead, and it was my fault. Suddenly, I didn't have the strength to stand. I didn't tell anyone, but I thought I was pregnant again, and the chances of it being Sam's baby weren't great. Now my husband is dead, and it was my fault. "My Sam is dead," I howled. "Just shoot me now." In Atherton's office, I jumped to my feet. "Bullshit," I shouted so loudly that Atherton's secretary peered out from behind the door and looked at me angrily. "My great-grandfather didn't die like that," I said. "He died in bed when he was about 75 years old." Samantha looked at me with the same amused smile she had when she caught me looking at her breasts for the first time. I smiled back. You had to make a fool of yourself to see her smile. Her smile quickly faded as Miss Peyton patted my arm, trying to calm me down. I didn't understand why this woman was trying to create the impression that something was going on between us. I abruptly pulled my hand out of her grip, as if she had some kind of illness, and sat back down. Samantha was amused by this. "Can I continue?" asked Atherton. Sam Dunson's diary. The 6th of May. I'm sitting here alone tonight, and my heart is breaking. I think about where I went wrong. Why did God leave me? Today was the worst day of my life. An innocent soul was lost today, and God help me. I still don't understand why it all happened. I tried to think positive this morning and forget about yesterday. I still felt like there were things that Constance and I needed to discuss, but she was so beautiful, and I loved her so much that I didn't want to bring her any sadness or suffering. So I kissed her goodbye this morning like I always do, and she seemed to want me to stay home, but that was okay because she always asks me not to leave, so I didn't think much of it. If I had known that this could be the last time I saw her face or kissed those lips, I would never have left. I drove into town as always, but despite my attempts to be cheerful, There was a feeling of foreboding hanging over everything. It seemed that yesterday's trouble was only a warning. Many of the men in the city did not meet my eyes. Others seemed ready to fight. Only Maria, a beautiful young Mexican woman who handles business at the sheriff's office, said something happy to me. Maria is something special. If I hadn't met Constance, I would probably have married her. She will make some man very happy. My assistants, her relatives, often joke that I am the happiest man in the world, having one wife at home and another at work. Maria really cares about me a lot, but I'm sure she's just grateful for the job and being friendly. In the afternoon, I went to the saloon for a beer and lunch. Of course, there were the usual gamblers, drunkards, and slackers, but the atmosphere was somehow strange. Of course, they talked a lot about my duel yesterday. Some men claimed that it was a lucky shot and that I could never repeat it in a million years. Others said that they had seen me shoot before and that I could hit any target. I hated that kind of talk and actually still felt bad about what happened. I could have easily just wounded him or shot him in the arm and disarmed him. But I let my anger take over because he insulted me through Constance and the man died because of it. I did not feel proud of my victory, only shame for my weakness of spirit, and decided to leave so as not to hear about it anymore. But of course, it didn't work out. As soon as I left the saloon, a big guy from the next town pushed me angrily. "You want to start a fight, mister?" I asked him. "From what I hear, you're the one who starts the fights," he replied. "You killed my brother in cold blood yesterday because you were jealous that he had your cheating wife. If every man who sleeps with that bitch dies, there won't be any men left in Texas." "I don't know what you're talking about. Your brother challenged me to a duel. I even let him reach for the gun first. And Constance almost never comes to town," I replied sharply. "You let him reach for the gun first because you and your brother are professional marksmen, and he was just a cowboy. He didn't stand a chance against you. And as for your bitch, as far as I'm concerned, she doesn't even have to come to town. She's not selling herself, she's just giving it away for free at your ranch. I heard she's taking on more than one man at a time now. I can't wait to." He didn't have time to finish because at that moment my fist slammed hard into his jaw, sending him into the mud on the street. I was angrier than ever. "Let's see if you're better than your brother," I snapped. "Finally, I was starting to think you're just as much of a coward as your brother. Doesn't he shoot people in the back? Or are you as big and soft as your bitch?" He smiled as he said this. Laughter and grins were heard again from the assembled spectators. No matter how angry I was, all my regrets and anguish about yesterday disappeared. I was ready to kill another person because of Constance's good name. We lined up outside again, and it seemed like the whole town, plus some others, had gathered to watch. I looked at my opponent and was puzzled. He was not looking at me, but at something behind me. I wasn't going to fall for that old trick. He hoped that I would turn around to see who was behind me, and then he would grab the gun and shoot me while I stared at nothing. I continued to look him straight in the eyes, waiting for any movement that would indicate his intention. If he doesn't move soon, I'll kill him just to end this and find out what's going on with Constance. There was no way she was doing what he said. She was at home taking care of our baby. He blinked, and as if by inertia, my hand went for the gun, even before my brain registered his movement. Like his brother, he was slow, and before his hand touched the weapon, my Schofield .44 spat another bullet in his direction. But even before he fell, I heard a sound behind me. I instinctively knew that this was the cocking of the gun. He didn't look at the ghost, and I knew I'd be late. I will die. But even when I heard the terrible roar of the gun, something small crashed into me, intercepting almost the entire charge. I was hit by several pellets, but remained unharmed. He then grabbed another pistol from one of his men and fired again. He was looking for another weapon, so I handed him my gun, sitting in the dirt and holding the small body of Maria, who was trying to breathe, in my arms. With tears in my eyes, I begged her to tell me why she did something so stupid. No job was worth such a sacrifice. "Love you," she said, "from the first day you came to town. Long until that dressed-up witch you married, I always L. and she died, smiling, as if saving me really made her happy. I don't know how long I sat there holding her and crying in the street. All I know is that some of Jack's men and my assistants stood around to prevent the horsemen from trampling me. Finally, the priest and the undertaker came and forced me to let her go. Juan, one of my assistants, was a relative of Maria and told me that she had a son and that he and his wife would take him in with them. I told him that he already has enough children to take care of. I will take him and raise him as my own, but he can visit him whenever he wants. One of the men in town had something to say about this, but very briefly. But he's Mexican, that's not right for, he began. Before he finished his stupid sentence, I shot him, and I've never regretted it. I regret shooting a man yesterday. I regret shooting his brother today. In both cases I could and should have been more merciful. But after shooting this racist, after the sacrifice Maria made for me, I never lost a second of sleep. There are no Mexicans in this town, I said. There are no whites, no blacks, no Chinese. There are only people here. From today, we are all equal. Any objections? Perhaps they saw my condition or sympathized with me after everything I had been through, but no one said a word. I looked back and my brother was gone. I didn't know where he had gone, but I had to go to the undertaker and make all the preparations for Mary's funeral. Juan was with me for a while, but he was called away. I organized everything, flowers, her coffin, and even the clothes in which she will be buried. The priest looked as if he wanted to object to Mary's funeral on Sunday during the church service, but I noticed that he changed his mind and agreed when my hand accidentally slid towards the pistol in its holster. After that, it started to get dark, and I went home. I needed to talk to Constance, and this time we would have words, no matter how painful they might be. This led to even more shock. When I opened the door to our house and found Juan's wife, Carmen, caring for my son, there was another little boy there who was maybe 4 years old. I immediately recognized Maria's eyes and knew who he was. Carmen didn't speak much English, but she handed me a piece of paper torn from the diary that Constance always kept. Dear Sam, there's just no easy way to say it. I betrayed your trust, and am unworthy to be either a wife or a mother. I love you more than life itself, but after the birth of our child, I began to have all sorts of unnatural desires that I could not control. By the time I became myself again, I had turned into a monster. I'm leaving for a monastery to try to become worthy of you again. I release you from our marriage vows, since it was I who made a mockery of them. Please find someone who is worthy of your love. You need someone to fill your life, and our son cannot grow up without his mother. Please try not to think too badly of me, because I never stopped loving you, and I will love you until the day I die. I wasn't evil, just weak. Perhaps the strict atmosphere and service in the monastery will purify my body, mind, and soul. Your loving wife, Constance. I dropped the paper and started crying again. I cried for 2 people I killed because they told the truth. I cried for the man Jack shot because he too died because of Constance's betrayal. I cried for 2 little boys who would grow up without their mothers. But most of all, I cried for Mary. Constance Danson Diary, June 16th. This morning, I woke up bedridden. Today is the first time I've cleared my head since Jack made me write a letter to Sam about going to a monastery. I have to admit, I didn't like the idea of being away from Sam and our baby. My idea was for Sam, the kid, and I to pack up and move to another city farther away to start fresh. Now that I've sorted out my desires, I'm perfectly healthy. I will never again want to have an intimate relationship with any man other than my husband. I'm completely cured, but Jack, being the caring brother he is, obviously wants to make sure of that. I don't even know which monastery they sent me to. They kept me asleep by adding sleeping pills to my food all the way here. At least it wasn't as bad as the terrible stagecoach ride. June 17th. I'm in hell, paying for my sins. I'm not in a monastery. In monasteries, you are not chained to a bed. This is Jack's revenge for the pain I caused Sam. He sold me to a house with a bad reputation in Mexico. The men here really like my blonde hair and blue eyes. Yesterday, I had to serve at least 20 men. They came one after another until I lost consciousness. The madam here is saying that I must serve her clients until she returns her investment in me, and then I will be free to leave. This is a far worse fate than I could ever imagine. I had everything and I lost it because of my lust. Atherton stopped reading and just looked at us. I think you all want to know what happened after that, he said. This is truly a fascinating, untold saga of American history. Samuel became the mayor of the city. His brother Jack became sheriff after him. Constance contracted syphilis and died without ever seeing Sam or her child again. Jack never told Sam where he really ended up. Constance, she had just died when this happened. Okay, let's talk business, Miss Peyton said, stroking my arm vigorously. Okay, let's not, I replied sharply, turning to Samantha. I'd like to hear what you had to suggest. Samantha was clearly tense. She licked her soft, full lips and looked at me. As you may have realized, Mary was my great-grandmother, and the Dunsons are yours. Miss Peyton claims to be related to the Constance family. This small town where they are from was renamed about 50 years ago. It is now called Dunson, Texas. They recently finished building a small museum, and I was going to give the diaries to this museum. As Mr. Atherton said, our family history is an untold saga of American history that should be known and loved by all people, and not just sold to one rich man. Hid it in his attic. But before you came, Mr. Atherton and Miss Peyton explained to me how much money you could get for the entire collection. The diaries themselves are valuable, but the pistols are real collector's items. I already told Mr. Atherton and Miss Peyton what I want to do with them. It was very nice to meet you. It was my dream, and I really know how she felt. Samantha stood up and left the office, leaving me perplexed. Miss Peyton's hysterical laughter began immediately after the door quietly closed. I turned to her, and she stopped laughing. Can you believe this woman? Give them to some little museum in the middle of nowhere, Texas? We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, not change. But don't worry, we don't need her. She did the dumbest thing I've ever or heard. Atherton, give me this contract. She handed me what looked like a deed or bill of sale, and my name was on it. What is this? I asked. She gave you the diaries, Miss Peyton laughed. Free, no money. She just gave it to you. Then she started laughing again. Some people just don't deserve money. You're right about that, I chuckled. Atherton, where are my pistols? He opened the wall safe behind his desk and pulled out a case containing my ancestors' pistols. I took the case and stacked the diaries on top. He placed them on the table and shook Atherton's hand. Then he headed towards the door. Wait, where are you going? Miss Peyton shouted. Just as I was leaving the building, I saw Samantha's Mustang pull out of the parking lot. I jumped into my car and quickly drove off. I was sure that I would catch up with her. Her little pony was light and fast, but we're still talking V6 versus my supercharged V8. Samantha had a big advantage and a heavy foot on the gas pedal, but I quickly caught up with her. She also had the advantage that I didn't know where she was going. She could go on any trip. In the end, the cops helped me. They pulled her over for speeding. I stopped at a safe distance from the police and began waving my hands, signaling them. One of the cops approached me cautiously, his hand on his gun. Officer, I didn't mean to alarm you, but I need to talk to my girlfriend after you finish writing her a ticket, I said. He just looked at me and nodded. You can talk to her while we check her ID and plates. Just don't try anything stupid. We have her driver's license and car. Why did you tell him I was your girlfriend? Samantha asked. Out of desire, I replied. But after that wonderful night you spent with Miss Peyton, I thought. After you left, I drove home alone. I'm just as confused as you are about what that bitch was saying and trying to make you and Atherton think. But there's nothing between me and her. Now tell me how to get to your museum, I said. What about all this money? She asked. To hell with the money, I prefer you, I replied. But it's not the way our ancestors did it, she said. This is not the scenario it should be. I know, I said. The script was for me to fall in love with a dumb blonde who would end up breaking my heart and hurting me. making a lot of people suffer because of her selfishness, right? She nodded. It happened and passed. Changed the script, I said sharply. We know that in the end what our ancestors did didn't work out. No one was happy. So we have a chance to do it the way they should have done it. And you've had enough practice. Don't you think it's time to get real? She nodded again, and we finally kissed. Her lips were as warm and soft as I imagined. We went to dancing and gave them pistols and diaries. We were invited to participate in the parade in honor of the city's Founders' Day and were given the key to the city. We moved there after our wedding. Miss Peyton spent a lot of her money promoting items she didn't have a contract to sell, so she was fired. She tried to sue us, but again, without a contract, she had no case. Atherton took this calmly and married his sour secretary. Turns out she was a real wild cat in bed. And my ex-wife Carla still calls me often, and I hang up. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.